David Brister here again with another episode of Chordplay, and this is the chords of King's X. And I've been a King's X fan since I was in high school, and I do remember, they started to appear in guitar magazines and music magazines. Their names started to pop up, a little bit on MTV and Handbangers Ball. And I went to a record store randomly and bought Faith, Hope, Love before I'd really even heard the band. And, I was a little bit late to the party. But I bought that album, and then all of a sudden, It's Love, had a music video, and they started playing that on MTV and Handbangers Ball, and it just clicked, And like I said, I was still in high school, but I was like, hey, I really like this, and it kind of had these progressive elements and rock, kind of these heavy, riffs and detuned, moments too. So it was like a combination of a lot of different things that I really like in music, especially progressive. I'm a big prog rock and prog metal nerd. I love that stuff. Rush, Yes, and King Crimson, Dream Theater. Give me that all day long. I'll listen to Porcupine Tree and everybody. And I love King's X. They just fit right in that collection of music. Tabor from King's X is a very respected and interesting and unique guitarist, and his influences are kind of scattered around everywhere. I mean, obviously, there's a huge Beatles influence. And people like Alex Lifeson, Brian May, Johnny Winter, but then also historically he did some early work with Phil Keaggy, and that's also another guitar music influence on Ty. Even though I've never seen them in concert, I did meet Doug Pennock at a NAMM show in Nashville years ago. And it was the last day, it was Sunday, and I was getting ready to leave. And I'll never forget that, I was leaving and he was basically coming in, and we kind of crossed paths. And I looked at him and I said, Doug. And he looked at me. And of course, I looked very different back then. I had hair, down to my butt, and, different glasses. I'm not even sure if I wore hats really back then, but I noticeably looked like Chewbacca at that time, compared to how I look now. Still kind of hairy, but I'll never forget that he just looked at me like he knew me, and then he kind of came over and we just started talking. And then I think it took him a few minutes to realize that he didn't actually know who I was, but he was extremely friendly, and he kept looking at my pass or my name on my badge, and I could tell he was trying to figure out, like, who are you? And then then basically I just admitted, I was like, I'm a huge fan. I just spotted you. You're really distinct looking. He has a very, distinct look. And, I told him I was a huge fan of Manic Moonlight. And he laughed, and he was like, oh, so you're the guy, that bought that album. And then we kind of laughed. But it made me feel bad for him to kind of admit, publicly like that to me, that that album really didn't do very well. So he kind of made a joke, and we laughed about it, but then afterwards I was like, that's such a shame, because, the whole world should know their music, and only a small fraction actually even knows who King's X is. The first example here is from the song Goldilocks, which is on King's X debut album, Out of the Silent Planet. And this is still a very popular kind of fan favorite song. And this really does kind of reveal a little bit of Ty's interest in using like drone strings and open strings, and kind of combining, fretted notes with open strings. He does this type of thing a lot in his music. It's loosely based around like a B5, like a B power chord. And I want you to think of a traditional, B5. But we're also going to open up the open B string, and we're going to start with this B5, like that. Now, one thing I've learned as far as playing with this song is the fingering you might want to use is a little different. I've actually had more luck using my pinky finger for that F sharp on the D string right there. And the main reason why I want to finger it that way, or the main reason why you might want to finger it that way, is it frees up your middle and third finger, because we're going to be changing notes. You're going to start with that B5, and then it's going to move to the 4th fret on the low E string, and that's going to convert, that little 3-string arpeggio that we're playing into a G sharp minor 7, like that. And then we're going to basically move down to the low open E string, the 2nd fret on the D, and the open B. And that's just an E5 or an E power chord. Then we got the B5, G sharp minor 7, the E5, and then the last chord that's in there, it's an F sharp sus4, and that's going to be the 2nd fret on the low E, the 4th fret on the D, and that open B. So if we put this together, and that's basically the pattern. Rhythmically, it's kind of playing with the timing a little bit too there. It's easier to hear it if you have some sort of, click or a metronome. I'm just going to use my foot here. And he basically repeats that 3 times in a row, and then there's an odd kind of quirky bar of 2/4 that's introduced, and then it goes back to 4/4. And then there's another weird bar of 2/4 and then back to 4/4. The next example is from the song Summerland, which is from Gresham Goes to Nebraska, their 2nd album. And this is another kind of ringing, sustained, arpeggiated chord sequence. And although it doesn't really sound like Goldilocks, it does have kind of a similar, style. The guitar part really is just picking through, partial chords. So we're going to do a little piece of E minor right here, and then a little piece of D over F sharp, and then a little piece of G, and then he's playing an A major in a very interesting way. It's right here, so that's the 5th fret, 4th fret, and the barred 2nd fret on the D and G strings. And then he plays a little bit of an A6 right here, which is cool. And kind of having that open G, rub up against it, which is neat. And then he repeats that first sequence of chords again. And then the second time through, he actually changes that A to an A7, which is kind of neat because you hear it one way in the first, the first pass, and then you hear it a different way in the second part. The hardest thing about that riff is the way the chords are ringing into each other. You really have to watch when you fret a note because you might accidentally silence a string, that's ringing. So you got to really watch out for it with that guitar part. Next example is from We Are Finding Who We Are, which is from the album Faith, Hope, Love. And this definitely has a very Hendrixy flavor or sound because he's using, an E7 sharp 9. And it seems like anytime somebody plays an E7 sharp 9, immediately, someone will stamp, Jimi Hendrix on top of it. But it does have like a Hendrix groove too. Sounds something like this. It's really interesting the way it's accented because you're starting with that heavy hit on the chord. And then, the low E, 3rd fret to the open low E, and then the B and the high E string open. And that little chromatic walk up. And then back to the Hendrix chord again. And then he moves that chromatic part up a fret. And he does this little kind of 2-note, call and response phrase. Song. The next example is from the song It's Love, which is from the album Faith, Hope, Love, and this was one of the first King's X songs I ever heard, and it immediately caught my ear. I heard these Queen and Beatlesque, vocal harmonies mixed with these heavy, chunky guitar riffs, and I was like, what is that? And of course it was King's X. So this song's in drop D, and he's doing this really interesting kind of droned melodic thing during the intro. It sounds something like this. It's a really cool guitar part. So he's kind of playing with like a D sus4 to a D major. And there he's really just kind of adding this melodic phrase. You know, he's adding an E and a G there on the G and the B string, while he's still barring, you know, that partial D chord. So I really like that little movement happening there. And then he basically moves down to a partial C, but he's also playing that against the D, so it's like a C over D. And then it's like a part of a G right there. You know, it's really just the open D and the B string, but it's implying, you know, G major. Like that. And then he does this hammer-on pull-off with the open D string. So it's just the second fret, the fourth fret to the second fret on the G with the open D. And then he's playing a partial G chord, so it's like a G over D. And that sounds something like this. After the intro riff, then it moves into the verse, and he just kicks that off with some one-finger power chords moving from E to F and then F to G. And then the verse, he's doing this really cool power chord based riff. And some of these chord shapes, it definitely is reminiscent of songs like 2 Minutes to Midnight, you know, by Iron Maiden, Somebody Save Me by Cinderella, and even Bark at the Moon, you know, kind of, even though Bark at the Moon's a little different because they're beyond just you know, 2 fretted notes. It is somewhat related to Bark at the Moon as well. So the chord progression here, we're going to start off with this A5, and then it's going to move to an A major 7 just by moving that A down to a G sharp. And then we're going to play a partial A7, 5th fret on the D, 6th fret on the G. And then it moves to a D over A, where we have the 4th fret on the D and the 7th fret on the G. So it's a really cool chord progression, and the way he plays it. It's a really, really cool chord progression. I like the way it kind of steps down, you know, the fretboard. The last example here is from the song Lost in Germany, which is on the self-titled King's X album. And this is a really cool riff and a great song, too. And I know the first time I ever heard this song, I was like, oh my gosh, you know, they're just never-ending awesome riffs coming from King's X. Strum with the open A string, you know, an A7 sus4 to an A7, and then he basically uses the fretted part of those chords, and he does an additional, you know, like D to C sharp move right there, something like that, and then he's walking down this little arpeggio, and the timing there is a little weird too. After he plays those 2 chords, then he's kind of doing like a little D5. And it's this weird little... And then he goes back to that little, you know, A7 sus4 to A7. And then he's doing the little D5 move again. And then he ends that with like kind of a partial, you know, giant D power chord. It's not like the giant, you know, D power chord that we had in the Tool lesson. He's really just playing the bottom 3 with the 2nd fret on the G. But that's such a cool riff. That's going to wrap up this lesson. Hopefully you got something new or interesting from this. And, you know, be sure to leave me some comments and some feedback and subscribe to Late Night Lessons, and I'll be back with some more episodes and content before you know it. Thank you.